to another episode of the Institute Up Close. I'm Stephen Heiner, and with us is the Superior of the Institute, His Excellency Bishop Donald Sanborn.
Hello, Stephen.
Nice to have you, Your Excellency. We're going to start this episode actually by clarifying a point from our previous episode, part one. Someone had a question about annulments that we had talked about before, and there was a question about documentary proof. What did you mean by that?
Well, if you have a document that makes clear that someone is not validly married for one reason or another, then you have documentary proof. Typically, it is proof of a previous marriage. You see. Or, on the other hand, it could be a death certificate, which proves that someone might be free to marry. You see, that's documentary proof. The reason why annulments go to court is in order to prove facts that need to be adjudicated in a court. So if somebody says, my father-in-law had a gun to my head and that's why I got married, you have to bring in witnesses that saw the gun and, the whole conversation, if you don't marry my daughter, you're dead. You see, that has to be proven and established as a legal fact. And there's witnesses on both sides to that. And it's just like any kind of courtroom scene. Or that my wife limited the number of children we could have, etc. That has to be proven. Or I was drunk when I got married. That has to be proven. Because a person who is looking to get out of a marriage is going to have a tendency to enhance the reason for the nullity of the marriage. So that's why those things have to be proven in court. You see, so but you see, documentary proof is already a proven fact. You see that somebody was married before, therefore they can't get married now.
So it's not so much an exception in that you're not giving an annulment. You're just recognizing here is a piece of paper that says
yes,
this person was already married.
Yes.
So
it's not,
there's no
it's
case.
It's not giving an annulment. No, it's just noticing that something is true. That's all.
Because some organizations make this idea of making moral judgments, and they say, well, it's not binding. In this case, we're not making a decision for the church. We're just making a moral judgment.
Well, that is false because marriage is for the whole church. If you're married in one diocese, you're married in all the dioceses of the world. And vice versa. If you're annulled in one, you're annulled in all of the dioceses of the world. So in our situation, a particular congregation cannot say to Mr. and Mrs., you're not really married. Then they come to us and they say, well, we have this annulment from this congregation, and now I'm married to somebody else. We would say, no, you're not. You see, because the congregation does not have any juridical authority to make a decision for the entire church. See, that is something that has to be handled by the juridical authority of the Catholic Church, because it has to be universal. The marriage is something that is a societal thing, and it has to be valid or invalid, as the case may be, all over the world, wherever you go. See, so that's I think it's a terrible abuse of whatever principle they are citing. I mean, you cannot cite epikeia for that. You cannot achieve a juridical authority from epikeia. That's the authority to rule the church. You just can't do that.
So I'll continue on point 9, which is under this heading of preaching. The clergy of the Institute shall preach a sermon on all Sundays and holy days of obligation, unless there is a serious reason whereby it is inconvenient or impossible. They may also preach a sermon on other occasions. What would be a serious reason, Your Excellency?
Oh, it could be anything. It could be time limitation, or the priest doesn't feel very good.
I don't think people
was late.
People have a sense of how long it takes to write a sermon, Your Excellency. I don't think the lay people, we really have a sense of how much work that takes.
It takes, yeah, it is. It could be anything, but it's rare. It's very rare that you would not preach a sermon. That's pretty much common law. I mean, you have to preach on Sunday and holy days, but any legitimate excuse would excuse. But it has to be a serious thing. It's a serious obligation to do that.
Point 10, the clergy of the Institute shall preach at least 4 times a year concerning the principles of Catholic resistance to modernism as contained in the Theological Directory of the Institute.
Yes, the lay people have to be reminded of all of the principles that guide what we're doing. Some priests have the idea that we shouldn't talk about those things. We should just talk about pious things, and as if the church is in a normal state, and just what you might call just pious things. And there's nothing wrong with that in itself. It's just that the lay people have to be educated about what we're doing and why we're doing it, and cannot sort of hide their heads in the sand and figure this is a way of escaping, and we're not going to talk about any of the problems or anything that concerns who's the Pope and who's not the Pope, etc. Those things don't concern me. I just want to be a pious Catholic. We can't leave them like that. That's wrong. And that's why I say that has to be at least mentioned in the course of the sermon from time to time.
Well, and I think, too, Your Excellency, people are always coming to the missions, coming to Mass for the first time. Everyone's coming from different angles, so you can't just say, well, everyone's already figured that out. We don't need to hear about that. And even people who have heard it, it doesn't hurt to hear it again.
No, actually, most people like to hear it. They like to hear things cleared up in their minds, and they are there at our Mass because they have made some very big decisions that the Novus Ordo is something totally unacceptable, and I think it confirms all of their instincts.
The point 11, the clergy of the Institute shall follow the instructions of the Superior General concerning the subjects of their sermons.
Yes, it was typical in dioceses that the chancery office, the bishop ultimately, would prescribe a syllabus of what to preach about. We have not enforced that, though.
Okay. But you may in the future.
May.
Point 12, the clergy should preach for not less than 10 minutes on a Sunday or holy day of obligation and not more than 30 minutes. So what's the reason for that range, Your Excellency?
Well, some priests go on and on and on, so 30 is the limit on that. And some priests just like to give a little, what we call fervorino, of 10 minutes, and that's not sufficient. St. Francis de Sales, though, said minimum 30. I mean, they used
Minimum
to give
of 30.
Yes, minimum 30 minutes.
And I think people would crowd there. They knew a sermon was going to be preached, and they would go, and the sermon could go for an hour or 2 hours.
Yeah, people were more pious in those days, but also you have to be. It depends on your quality as a preacher, as you have to maintain people's interest as you go along, and I always can tell when it's time to shut down the sermon. Certain
Do people start leaning one way or the
No,
other?
you can just tell. I mean, there's something. There's looks on their
Coughs.
faces, and that's the time to shut down the sermon because they're not listening anyway.
Okay.
So you sort of know. But if you know your subject, you see that if you speak to them in such a way that you know your subject, you know what you want to say, they're going to listen to you.
Well, and I noticed that the younger priests of the Institute, they tend to run on a program. I think they know what they want to say, and they know almost the time that they want to use to say it. And I think that probably helps as a template.
Yes.
Whereas you've had more experience, I think you could potentially be more discursive, and that's probably
Yes.
come from experience.
Yes. Another thing is eye contact. That you're looking around and locking eyes with people, and so. The best sign of a sermon is when people say, "I think he was talking about me." That's a good sign.
I don't think it was Father Ciccato experienced, but Father Ciccato might have told me a story about a priest who experienced that he thought he was really connecting with this lady in the front row, and at some point he saw her reach up her rosary and make sure she was on the right bead. So the connection was not really happening. Point 13. The clergy of the Institute shall make serious preparation of their sermons and shall be zealous in learning, either by reading books or seeking advice from others, the skill of delivering a sermon well.
Yes, there is a sermon can do a lot of good, and people sit up. I mean, if you're a good preacher, you know your subject, and you deliver well, you do a lot of good with a sermon, and people absorb it and take it to heart, and so it's really very much part of the apostolate.
So the next heading is the sacrament of matrimony. Point 14, the clergy of the institute shall observe the general instructions concerning matrimony, which shall be provided by the superior general.
Yeah, those are the all of the general laws of matrimony, and anything that's specific to our present problem. You see,
Would this include, I think you have a general rule, Your Excellency, you don't give communion at marriage.
except to the
marriages.
bride and groom,
Why is that?
because there are people that come, the guests come, who in many cases are either Novus Ordites or Protestants or non-atheists, non-Catholics of one form or other, and they might, especially in the context of the Novus Ordo, where they have Eucharistic hospitality, where everyone just goes up. We don't do that. But even before the council, they would do that. In other words, that they would observe that they would not distribute communion except to the bride and groom.
I suppose dress code also has to be particularly enforced at marriages.
Yes, yes. Many times the only dress that a woman, particularly a young woman, owns is a cocktail dress. Everything else is pants. And so they put that on, and so that's why I walk up in front of the church for a wedding, and I have excluded quite a few people from walking in.
And how did they respond, Your Excellency?
Usually very negatively, but that doesn't bother me.
How am I not surprised, Your Excellency? It doesn't bother you. Point 15, the clergy of the Institute shall not, under any circumstances, declare a marriage to be null, whether in a public or private manner, except in those cases in which the nullity of the marriage is certain from documentary proof.
Yeah, we've already talked about that.
Point 16, the clergy of the Institute shall not permit those who are not validly married to act as husband and wife toward each other. They may permit an invalidly married couple to remain together, provided that 1, there is a serious reason for their remaining together, 2, the invalidity of the marriage is not publicly known, 3, the invalidly married couple promise to act as brother and sister toward each other, and in fact take the necessary means to observe the promise, 4, there is no danger of scandal. I think there's actually been a couple cases in which you've seen this happen.
There have been a lot of cases. You don't know.
I know
them
it wouldn't be public, right? But
there you'd be surprised
because these conditions, Your Excellency, in our modern world seem, I wouldn't use the term heroic, but very difficult. And so I'm very impressed to hear that there are couples that have managed to do that.
Yes, there are quite a few because because of the Novus Ordo annulments. They come in with Novus Ordo annulments. A lot of people come in with Novus Ordo annulments and they're remarried. And we don't accept them. And we say, you can't receive the sacraments. You can come to Mass, but you can't receive the sacraments. And most just go away. But some stay and observe all of those rules. Those are the general rules of the Catholic Church. There's nothing we made up on that. That was a common practice. Before the council and before all the annulment nonsense, it was probably much more rare. And another problem is that it has to be secret. Before the council, they would tell you go to the next parish. So you just don't, if there were any kind of suspicion in one parish, well, you could go to the next parish, which is 15 minutes away, or even 30 minutes, and then it would not be known. You see, that's one of the things that it cannot be well known. See, and so, but that's what was actually a whole study done by Catholic University on that very point. What is necessary for cohabitation in an invalid marriage situation.
I was ticking through these points, and I suppose if someone, this couple were to come to one of the Mass centers, they wouldn't have been known, and they would have had this consultation with you. And if they don't have any children, they can have separate bedrooms. There are a number of things that would make this easier.
Well,
to
they
pull
need a
off.
serious reason. You see, a serious reason is usually children. Another serious reason would be that they need both of their incomes, for example, Social Security incomes, in order to live, or that one is very sick and needs the care of the other. Those would be serious reasons. But if they're just living together and they have no serious reason, they have to split up.
Well, these are part of the difficult cases that you have to deal with that we as lay people don't really ever hear about or know about. But
No.
take up a lot of your time.
Yes, they do, and it is heroic. It is. Some people are heroic in their observance of what they have to do. Yeah.
Especially when the world is telling them you're crazy for
Right.
believing what
Right.
these men in black are telling you.
Yeah.
Point 17, the clergy of the Institute shall ensure that the couples to be married be properly instructed according to the syllabus of marriage instruction. How long does that normally take, Your Excellency?
It takes quite a while, actually. There's a lot to cover. It's how long. It's really how many sessions you have. It's not a specific time, but there's a great deal to cover. The sacrament itself and everything about the sacrament, raising children, the duties of husband to wife and wife to husband, and duties of parents to children, how to raise children. All of those things take some time, and especially in the context of modern attitudes. The Catholic Church's view of the home is quite different from the modern view of the home. Wives, be subject to your husbands, as St. Paul says, as to the Lord. And that's sort of lesson number one when it comes to the duties to each other. That the father has to be the head of the house, and the mother has to be subject to him. And some just don't accept it. And if they don't, we don't marry them.
Is there also a practical spacing to not allow couples to rush into marriage? They have to take these classes, so there's a reasonable space given?
Well, no. I mean, it's the church doesn't say too much about that. In other words, as long as they know each other sufficiently. I mean, if two people met each other at a bar and wanted to get married the next day, we would not do that. Sorry. No, we would want them to, they have to be instructed, and we have to have a sense that they know everything they should know, and also consent to everything that they must consent to. See?
Well, and technology enables this. I think I know at least of a few couples who father was in one place, the bride to be is in one place, the groom is in, and they're doing a Zoom meeting to handle this because they're not all in the same locality.
Zoom is one of our best friends.
The next heading is parish bulletins. Point 18, the clergy of the Institute shall place in their parish bulletin all information which is required by the Superior General.
Yes.
What information, Your Excellency?
Oh, if there's anything. It's really quite routine. It's just if there's any sort of particular thing that I want them to say.
One of the things that I noticed that Institute Mass Centers publish is the collection. And we've talked to you about this before, that I've spent 10 years in France, and the French would faint if they were to see this. Because
this is America, though.
Right. Well, because they don't like to talk about money, and they certainly don't want the clergy feel very hard pressed to even ask. Why is this an important thing for you to publish? Why do you think in America this is appropriate?
Well, I think that it's really for fundraising. I think that people, if they see expenses and what you're spending and also what you're taking in, as far as the financial success of what you're doing. So that's why in missions we say, here's our expenses, and then here's what we took in. If they see the thing sinking, they might give some more, and because they don't want it to sink, because obviously if it doesn't work financially, we can't continue it. I think that it gives them an incentive to give, and it's almost like a thermometer, to a fundraising thermometer, and it gives them a participation. If you're totally silent about it, they don't know what is being collected, they don't know what is in the bank. I mean, I would when I was doing the bulletins, I would tell them what their bank account was and how much It really helps with financially to do that, So
You think it brings out the generosity of the faithful to see it?
Yes, it does. They have incentive. If you say nothing, it's just they throw some money in there, but it gives them incentive. Now that doesn't mean that you are, as in the Novus Ordo, beholden to the people to show them financial statements and all that. I mean that's something that is private to the Catholic Church. But the that's something that came in with the Novus Ordo.
So in some of the more established missions, you'll see year to date and then compared to last year. So here's what
Yes.
we did last November. Would that be a subject of an announcement? Say, well, we're down quite a bit from last year.
Well, all I can tell you is I used to do that bulletin for our mission in Vero Beach and also in Florida. When I went to Vero Beach, the first thing they would look at is that, not the pious thing on the front or anything. I used to put some pious thoughts on it. No, they don't care about that. Go straight for that. What was last week's collection? Yeah, but that's America. This is and so yeah, the French just.
I know we're going to get it from our French watchers.
Gosh, they just would say that's awful. And but Americans are pragmatic and they're financial, in the sense that they have a sense of money.
I've shared that before, that we have a lot of financial idioms in our speech. We say things like the bottom line,
Yes.
or at the end of the day, which is when the stock market closes.
Yes.
So you said before, Catholics have different cultural observances all around the world.
They
We
do.
shouldn't expect to all be the same, and you're adapting to the American
Yes.
realities. The last one for today's episode, design and decoration of churches, point 19. The clergy of the Institute must submit for approval to the Superior General any design for construction or decoration of churches, and shall follow the instructions of the Superior General in these matters.
Yeah, that's so that they don't do anything ugly.
Have you seen this happen before?
There are some horribly ugly churches, just awful, ugly churches, and so yes, there used to be a diocesan building committee, that would supervise those things, and so it's just to regulate, because some people have horrible taste, and they'll go out and buy things that are just as ugly as sin. That's the only way to put it, and put them in their churches, and they have to be restrained from doing that.
Well, we will continue on in our final part of this discussion of the Pastoral Directory. If you enjoyed what you heard, as always, hit like, subscribe, share this with people who you'd like to introduce the Institute to. If you'd like to, also you can send a super thanks. As always, Your Excellency, thank you for your time.
Thank you.